What's up, y'all? My name is Andrew Defy, aka the Gorilla Poet Laureate, aka the Hoodie God, aka Spitting Quarantino, aka I wear my sunglasses at night indoors because my eyes are as sensitive as my heart is, y'all. And welcome to Masked Up. We are back on our new night in time after a few weeks off. We needed a little recharge, and now we are back ready to bring you the latest health news and interviews with professionals from around the country. And we are starting off with a banger tonight as we talk to Dr. Author, and diversity, equity, inclusion superhero Ebony Jade Hilton. Yeah. We welcome you, as always, to chime in right here in the comments or send your episode feedback to the Masked Up live stream at gmail.com. We also ask that you keep an open mind and remember these are people in our human family on the other side of this screen, no matter if they agree with us or not. I don't mean to be a hippie about it, but we are all connected and we can still show each other kindness and love from opposite sides of most issues. Note, I said most. There's a lot going on in the weekly Rona update, but it's been like this for the last year. There's just as much or more going on in the racism crisis. Has police violence been affected by all of the protests and attention over the last year since George Floyd's murder at the hands of Derek Chauvin? We're going to get into the data of it tonight. But also, can you just feel how it feels when police murder another unarmed young black man in Minnesota, not 10 miles from where Derek Chauvin was on trial? Kim Potter is a 26-year veteran of the Brooklyn Center Police Department who would later claim she mistook her gun for her taser when fatally shooting Dante right in the chest. We've seen that before. New Year's Day, 2009, Oscar Grant on a BART platform with the same excuse. While the Chauvin verdict came down guilty on all charges, this was far from justice. This was barely accountability. Justice would be a man not being dead in the first place, and this needs to be precedent. Thank you to everyone who's been keeping the pressure on. Let's not any of us get complacent, y'all. Look, I said y'all, but white allies, I'm looking at us. Accountability isn't even the minimum. We got a lot more work to do. So let's get to it. We're going to get into a lot of things tonight, and we've got an expert in the field to get into them with. So let's get this show started with the weekly Rona update, y'all. Yeah. So the COVID numbers continue to come down and vaccination numbers continue to go up in the Golden State. Not that we should be getting comfortable quite yet because a lot of us are still in the substantial risk territory, but we are coming down slowly but surely. Across the state, daily cases and deaths continue to decrease toward pre-pandemic numbers. Things are looking up, y'all. The numbers of hospitalized are going down while the number of available ICU beds is going up. Over half the state is in the moderate risk orange tier, with some counties even in the minimal risk yellow tier. We got a little more work to do, y'all, but I'm cautiously optimistic we've turned the corner on this thing. But I mean, we'll talk to Dr. Hilton about that a little later in the show. Keep washing your hands, keep wearing your mask, California. We are almost there. By now, you have probably heard that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has been put on pause. According to the one and only Dr. Anthony Fauci, this pause may end as early as Friday. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine has officially been on pause since April 13th when the FDA and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention called for the pause after 6 rare cases of blood clots reported in U.S. recipients of the vaccine. Let's hear from the man himself. This is Dr. Fauci on NBC News with our homeboy, Lester Holt.
Dr. Anthony Fauci is acknowledging this news has the potential to shake vaccine confidence, but says transparency is important. We spoke earlier this afternoon. Was a pause necessary in your view?
Yes, I believe it was necessary for a couple of reasons. One, to investigate these a bit more, to make sure we get much more of the details and the granular details of that. But also, it's important during this period of pause to alert physicians on the outside who might see women or men, but mostly women, as we've seen, all 6 of these women who might come in with a clotting disorder like this.
And Dr. Fauci, we were told these vaccines had been thoroughly tested. There were no shortcuts, that they were safe. If there is, in fact, a connection between blood clots and the J&J vaccine, why wouldn't it have been discovered during the trials?
It's a matter of numbers, Lester. For example, if you look in a clinical trial, generally clinical trials have anywhere from 30,000 to 40,000 people in it. You're talking about an adverse event that has occurred in 6 people out of 6.85 million people who are vaccinated in the United States with the J&J. When you get out into the real world, you're giving it to tens and tens of millions of people. And it is at that point that you see if there is a rare adverse event, you will pick it up as you get into the millions of people who are vaccinated.
What would you recommend to anyone who has had the J&J vaccine in the last couple of weeks? Is there anything they can do?
Well, right now, I would make sure they understand that this is really a very rare event. And in fact, it had occurred in people in a very small bracket of time frame between 6 and 13 days. So if you had received the vaccine a couple of months ago, then I think you would have absolutely nothing to worry about. I would be very surprised if there was any issue there. If you had received it within a period of, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks, or a week or 2, I would tell them, again, it's a very rare event, but you should be alert to see if you get symptoms of a severe headache or some issue with movement or stroke-like syndromes that would bring you to the doctor. Make sure you tell them that you've been vaccinated.
Dr. Fauci says they have not seen this particular issue with either the Moderna or Pfizer vaccines.
And while we are talking about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and the blood clotting issue, let's look at some real quick numbers regarding blood clots. These come to us from Unbiased Science Podcast, and you can see how COVID itself actually causes far more blood clots than the Johnson & Johnson vaccine ever has. I like this because you get an honest perspective on the percentage that is affected by these clotting issues. Of course, this is not to downplay the issues for those individuals affected. We want to send love to our family going through this side effect as people and not statistics. But also, we just want to help combat some of the fear that is going around about this vaccine pause. It's literally a 1 in a million chance, maybe a little bit more. I'm a poet laureate, not a mathematician. So normally, we would do either our It's Called Science or the Racism Crisis at this point in the show. But tonight, we're going to do both of them at the same time with some help from our friends at the Status Quo. So Status Quo, spelled with a K on Quo, they gathered some in-depth research about police murder, who it's affecting, and if all of the documentation through filming is actually helping to address the problem. They said, myth 1, most victims are involved in a violent incident. As you can see by this graph, 58% of police murders take place with officers responding to a non-violent offense. If an event is non-violent and becomes violent upon your arrival, this means you escalated the situation, and as an officer and public servant, you have done more harm than good. And just a reminder, guys, that's not what we pay you for. This is a lot of people to be killed at mental health check-ins, y'all. It's almost like the police aren't especially trained in handling mental health crises. And perhaps there should be public programs where trained professionals are available to respond to any mental health crises in the community. And perhaps we should fund those programs with some of our tax dollars that are currently going to the police, since they won't have to respond to those calls anymore, because it's been proven to not be in anyone's best interest for them to do so. Myth 2. Things are getting better as more attention is getting paid to police violence. You can see from this slide from the Washington Post, you see the trajectory through the years really stays the same when it comes to the police murder of our Black family. Although the study does show that it's happening less in major urban areas and more in rural and suburban areas, they suggest this means that training is working, but it needs to happen more in these small town police departments. Myth 3. Black people are not killed any more frequently and are more likely to be armed. This myth is trickery of numbers. White folks love to say that more white folks are killed by the police every year than black folks, which is a real statistic, but it lacks context. Black family only makes up 13% of the population. This means the rate at which folks are killed by the police is more than twice as high as white folks. And all of those rates are way too high. Thank you to the Status Quo and Washington Post. To explore more statistics, one of the most incredible resources I've seen on the subject is at mappingpoliceviolence.org, which also has a link to California Police Scorecard, an incredibly powerful site with grades and stats on police departments all around the state. So make sure you go check that out. Our guest tonight has become a resident voice around the country for not only COVID news, but also for diversity, equity, inclusion work. She is a successful kids author, a history-making MD, and a fellow joy hunter. And over the weekend, we got to catch up and talk all things DEI to AVA. Y'all give it up for Dr. Ebony Jade Hilton. Dr. Ebony Jade Hilton, how are you?
I'm doing I'm post 2020, so everything is great at this point. Yeah.
So you are a real life superhero, not only a history maker as the first African American female anesthesiologist in Medical University of South Carolina history, but someone who is currently sculpting the landscape of diversity, equity, and inclusion across the medical field and beyond. Thank you for your time and energy in being here to talk to us. And first off, I want to ask, just generally, so vaccinations are becoming more widely available. States are reopening. People's general spirits seem up. Everyone is ready to go outside for a hot, humid summer.
Yes.
Give it to us straight. How are we actually doing with COVID right now? And can we be cautiously optimistic yet?
Right. I'm a lover of optimism, and I will always try to extend that branch, right? So positive things first. Yes, we're vaccinating close to 4 million people a day at this point. And we've done a tremendous amount of work to make that happen. Education, getting the outreach out there, and really trying to push this narrative of not us doing it to the community, but the community actually wanting it and saying, hey, when is my turn too? Because we've done a great job of having that relationship building over the last 12 months. That being said, we know that we do have an increase in our variants. We know that we have a double mutant. California, thank you for that. We have a double mutant now with the COVID-19, unfortunately. We know that, unfortunately, we've crossed over the threshold of over 500,000 Americans now, unfortunately, losing their lives to COVID-19. And it is one of these things where I do fear, yes, we're vaccinating 4 million people a day currently, but we know there's a sizable group of persons that are vaccine hesitant to absolutely, I will not have this vaccination. And what I do fear is that we're going to get to that 200 million person mark, and we're going to see a hard, fast stop in the persons that we are having vaccinated. And unfortunately, if that does happen, we have a threat to herd immunity that we won't be able to achieve it. So we have to continue to be vigilant. We have to continue to have these conversations so people can ask questions so we can get back to normal, because that's our ultimate goal.
And a follow-up, and I think maybe the deeper question, you kind of touched on it, how are we doing with vaccines? And most especially, are we doing any better at getting them to our Black and brown family than we have been doing?
Right. Well, unfortunately, the truth of the matter is no. Of the fully vaccinated, we have 75 million Americans at this point fully vaccinated, but 8% of those are African Americans. We know that the Hispanic Americans and African Americans have been hit particularly hard with COVID-19, with higher death rates, with higher infection rates, even looking at the extension of how this pandemic has influenced economic stability. We know that they've lost their jobs and are facing unemployment and, unfortunately, food bank lines at higher rates. So, yes, there's still tremendous work that needs to be done. And that trickles down when we're given those disparities. We have to realize too with COVID-19, it's not just the old people when we're talking to the Black and brown communities. Literally, we have higher death rates in every single age category down to our children. Racial minority children make up 48% of the children population, but yet they make up 75% of the children who died from COVID-19. And the highest disparities aren't even with the super old. And when I mean super old, I mean 85 and older club. There, Black people were 1.8 times more likely to die from COVID-19 than if we were white. But the greatest disparity is literally that age group of 30 to 49 years old, the middle of when you're an adult, you have a job, you have security, you have your home. Yeah, and if you're African American or Hispanic American, you're 5 to 6 times more likely to die from COVID-19 than if you're white in that same age group. So it's a lot to consider. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is at this point, we have 40,000 new orphans left in the wake of COVID-19 because parents, young people are dying from this disease. So it's very important that we do take the precautions and get vaccinated.
Yeah. So this next question is a new question for the show, but I think it's going to become a regular one. You're a highly educated medical professional, and this show is broadcast on Facebook and seen by half the internet. What is the biggest myth that you'd like to dispel around COVID, the vaccine, or any other medical issues?
Right. I guess for one, the biggest myth is particularly around COVID-19. I think we need to address the labeling it Kung flu and all this ridiculous rhetoric that's put, unfortunately, our Asian American friends and family members at risk of violence towards them. This virus does not care about your race and ethnicity. It does not care about your political affiliation. It does not care if you drive a Range Rover or if you're on public transportation. It does not care. And so to stop assigning it to people in that way would be great. We can start that yesterday. But I think, the other greatest myth that I would just want to debunk is just all the things that does go on social media of people saying that COVID-19 was caused by 5G. That was a big one. We've had myths of the COVID vaccine itself having a chip inside that can track you. We have cell phones for that, so we wouldn't need to. It's crazy things like that. That unfortunately, though, because of it only takes to plant a seed of fear to prevent a movement that could potentially save people's lives. And at this point, we're still burying between, like I said, 700 to 1,000 people a day in the United States of America. And we don't have to. We are one of those nations that have resources at our fingertips. But we're choosing this battle that is now extended into, we're almost halfway through this year, I feel like, and it's going so fast. And a lot of us, our year looks the same as it did in 2020, and it doesn't have to be this way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the tragic murder of Daunte Wright has re-sparked conversations surrounding police brutality and systemic racism, which are topics that you frequently discuss in interviews and on your social media platforms. In a CNN interview last summer, you described the coronavirus pandemic and police brutality as being part of the same disease.
Yeah.
I thought that was so deep. Can you explain a bit more about what you mean by that?
Right. Well, with COVID-19, this intersection of pandemic and protests, right? What we see is that the same risk factors that lead to Black men in particular dying at higher rates from police brutality are the same risk factors that lead to Black and brown people dying at higher rates from COVID-19, right? The same lack of resources being put into health and instead going into policing, right? So why do we have, this budget that is stacked on top of each other and literally more and more money coming into the policing system every year, but yet you're twice likely not to have a hospital within your district if you're in a Black and brown community, right? You're more likely to have, the drugs and the even the convenience stores, the liquor stores, the things that lead to having those interactions with police officers but you're 70% of all pharmacies are in predominantly white communities. Why is this? You know, and I had in growing up, I lived on both sides, right? I grew up in a single parent household. I got free lunch. My mom did the best that she could do to do what she had to do for me and my sisters. And then I now live in a different socioeconomic status of where I see in my community, although there is crime that happens in these gated communities, much more drugs I've seen passed around in some of these gated communities than I did in my neighborhood. But yeah, I never see a single police officer in my neighborhoods now that I saw constant present as a child, to the point that I thought that was normal. I thought it was normal that a police officer is parked on your street. What do you mean that's not how, you know, when I talked to my med school classmates, I was like, what do you mean that's not how you grew up? But that's the difference. And it's one of those things, we know that 1 in every 1,000 Black men can expect to be killed by the police in their lifetime. 1 in every 1,000. They're 3 times more likely to die if you're a Black man and if you're a white man. But yet, when we're looking at COVID-19 numbers, at this point, out of every 550 Black people who were alive last 2020, 1 has died from COVID-19. These numbers overlap perfectly, and we're dealing with 2 pandemics, but really just one. And what I say is that COVID-19, police brutality, our children being expelled from schools more often, Black and brown people not owning houses, the economic and wealth gap, all of those are symptoms of one disease process, and that disease process is systemic racism. And we have to tackle that. And that's the way that we get rid of all this other stuff, right? So we don't treat the symptoms, we treat the disease.
And it goes so deep. I was watching another one of your interviews, and you broke down the systemic inequities in the vaccine rollout. And I loved how you broke this down and how far you broke it down. Can you speak on how the ways we're tying vaccine distribution to age and employment are racist?
Right. I mean, literally, like we said earlier, 75 million Americans have been vaccinated, but only 8% of those are Black. And it's not a surprise. It was very much intentional. If you're looking at the phase rollout, phase 1A was healthcare workers and nursing home residents. But what we know is that healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, the respiratory therapists, 60% of those are white. Even if we look at the nursing home residents, we know that it costs money to put your family members in a nursing home. And by April of 2020, less than 50% of all Black people actually had a job. And so if it costs you money to put your family members there and you don't have money, then your family members will not be in the nursing home. They'll be living at home with you. So what we're seeing is that 78% of all nursing home residents are white. When we go down to phase 1B, they dropped it to the age level of 75 and older, and those who were essential workers. But 75 and older, the life expectancy for Black people before the pandemic was 75. We don't live that long. And when we're looking at essential workers, police officers, firemen, teachers, again, those people, majority of those are actually white. And so the classification, that the thing that got Black people in the door was actually if you had a pre-existing condition. So if you had heart failure, if your kidneys did not work, if you had cancer, those got you on the list, which means for Black people in total, in order to qualify to be vaccinated in the earlier front of this rollout of vaccines, you basically had to go into 2020, meaning that in 2019, at least one of your organs had to already be failed, dead, and gone for you to qualify. And that simply is racist. Because what we know, again, is that Black people were dying at higher rates at younger ages. And that wasn't put into the process. Instead, they tied this life-saving intervention to age, of which we die at younger ages, and to employment, in which we're the first ones to be fired and the last ones to be hired. And that is historically true. So they knew that when they were actually creating the policy in the first place.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Now, tell us about Good Stock Consulting. You guys are kind of like the Justice League, but for equity, diversity, and inclusion, right?
Right. I mean, because it's one of those things. We founded Good Stock Consulting in 2018, actually. And it was because my 2 business partners, every time we got together for brunch, we would always end up on this conversation of the system is flawed. And when we're talking about the system, we're not just talking about the healthcare system. We're talking about the educational system and our children being expelled at higher rates. We're talking about the housing and commercial development of our communities, and Black and brown people not being able to get a house, or getting these predatory loans that have us paying interest rate much higher while our houses are being depreciated, right? We're talking about the injustice of police brutality and the need for reform in that industry. So literally across the board, we saw that there were issues that weren't being addressed because usually the persons in charge of creating the policies look nothing like me and you, right? They look nothing like the persons that are going to be the most on the short end of the stick. And so we said, well, since they don't, then we'll create an industry ourselves, and we'll create a means by which we talk from the grassroots to the grass tops, engage with the community, talk about what is it that you're seeing now. And so we can translate that to the board members. We can translate that to the CEOs of these corporations to say, this is where the flaws are. So instead of you spinning your wheels and creating these policies like the vaccine rollout that make no sense when you're saying register online, because back in August, we proved that these children didn't have Wi-Fi access to do their homework. So why are you going to put it on the internet for them to register for vaccines 3 months later? That doesn't work. That's not effective. But when you don't have persons who've lived that life experience, given that input, because again, I grew up in that neighborhood, I know what is there and what is not there. So don't tell me you're going to put it at a CVS or a Walgreens when we didn't have that in my neighborhood. So what's your plan B for me? But to have those hard and difficult conversations where we don't allow temporary fixes to be looked at as a hand clap and a pat on the back. That's not a hand clap and a pat on the back, because what we want to do is, once we identify those flaws, yes, you can put those temporary fixes in, and yes, you can vaccinate people in the middle of this church parking lot. But at the end of the day, what we're going to demand is that if there was a need for a mobile clinic in that community, that's because there wasn't a permanent fixture in that community, and we're going to fix that. So that's what we did. Good Stock Consulting. Yeah.
So you and your Good Stock Consulting crew recently started a petition to solicit support for a new federal cabinet position, Secretary of Equity. You're talking about initiating EDI assessments and policies while leveraging best practices and resources across federal agencies. This is huge.
Right.
Tell us more about it.
Right. Well, we know we have a Department of Defense, a Department of Education, a Department of Housing, a Department of Transportation. All these departments that we as taxpayers, every Black, brown, white American pours our money into this system, and we say, here's our money, create policies. But we know these policies, they roll out and they have disparities linked to them every single time. The COVID vaccine rollout can be one that our taxpayers, we say the vaccine is free. We gave money, and our tax money is paid for this, right? So we paid for it in some form or fashion. But we know there's disparities that are linked to it. And the question I had was, if there's disparities in every single department, then why isn't there a governing body, a standalone department that says, we're going to look at every policy that comes out of here with an equity lens? And if we're seeing things that unfairly targets these marginalized communities, not only along the lines of race, but also gender, also your sexual orientation, also your language, your primary language, our form of communication. If there's anything that is unfair, then we're going to have some accountability tied to it. Because that's the thing. We report the same disparities year after year after year after year. What happens? Nothing. And we go and report it again the next year. We need to tie some accountability, have some metrics that can be tracked for each department to say, with all this money, Department of Defense, we give you $740 billion every year. Let's see where that money is going, and let's see where along the lines as far as the equity, if there's inequity there, then you must address it, or there's going to be consequences for that. And so, it's a progressive way to think, but honestly, whenever we speak about it, many people say, how is this not even a thing already? Why is this obviously there should be a Secretary of Equity. Why is there not? It's one of those things that it's because we haven't asked for it yet, and we haven't demanded it. And this country is a democracy, and it is truly ran by the people if we band together and say, we want justice for all, liberty for all, equity for all. So, yeah.
Yeah, make sure y'all go sign that petition. All right. Can we talk about Ava?
Right.
For those of you who don't know, when Dr. Hilton isn't saving lives or redesigning a more equitable America or being the go-to doctor on every channel that cable has to offer, she also wrote a couple amazing kids books about a little girl named Ava and her adventures that has nothing but 5-star reviews. So
Yeah.
why a kids book? What was the process like? And are there any more Ava adventures coming anytime soon?
I know. You know, Ava, I started writing back in, how was that, 2016, I think, right around there, because of my niece, my little niece. She's now 6 years old, but she was a lover of books. And I grew up a lover of books, and I would always try to find books that looked like me, and they just simply were not there. And when she came along, you know, she deserves to be able to see a book where she can be the lead character. You know, a little Black girl with her curly hair. Allow her to see that she doesn't have to be one that's introduced at the end of the story. Like, let me show you the lens through your eyes. And the point of the Ava series is literally to show children, when you're going through challenges, to find that positive spin. And the first book is with her moving and leaving all her friends behind, and she's going into a new city. And what does this look like? The second one is dealing with her changing schools. And I tried to put a lot of symbols in the second book that was really fun to play with. But like, for instance, the teacher, she's in a wheelchair. I don't mention that she's in a wheelchair. I just actually just show a picture of her being in one, because I want kids to get used to the idea that there are people of different capabilities. And it doesn't mean that they don't have a limitation on how successful they can be, though. We know children think their teachers are the most brilliant people in the world. So I wanted the teacher to represent that yes, she can be in a wheelchair. Yes, she can actually be the top of her game, for that inspiration. I wanted to show Ava's classmates that one was Muslim. I want to see that we can have these interactions and be different, and yet we're still exactly the same. You know, and those little pieces, that Ava's best friend, Levi, his dad is a police officer. Her father is in the military. Her mom is a doctor, to show that police officers and Black men can get along. You know, how do we start with the younger generation to show them that as you grow up and you become the next generation of doctors, and as you grow up to become the next generation of police officers, to know that we can truly live in a community. That's what I hope for. I hope that for her, my little niece, that her generation will have no clue what it meant to be having these protests that we're seeing with the George Floyd, and you know, that they will think that must have been a crazy time period, because what does that look like? I want it to be that weird to them. So yeah.
And I love that you don't, that these things aren't the focal points of the story, that that's the reality. Like,
Yeah.
you're just going to accept this reality, that this is what it is. I love that. So you recently wrote another kids book called We're Going to Be Okay, which teaches young children about how they can remain safe, healthy, and optimistic during the pandemic. Now, what message can you give to adults regarding how they can stay healthy and hopeful during these difficult times? And is it the same message?
Right. And if you go to goodstuffconsulting.com, the We're Going to Be Okay book is actually a free PDF that you can print out and distribute. We have all of our resources there that are literally free. Print it out, do what you want to do with them. But the We're Going to Be Okay book, we wrote it for kids, but if you look through it, we talk to the kids as if we're talking to adults, because kids are brilliant. They will learn whatever we tell them. So we literally go through and say, why is this called SARS-CoV-2 sometimes and COVID-19 other times? What's the scientific name? What's the family name? We break it down to that level to them. But then we go through the book and we talk about, you're going to start to see people doing things differently. They're not going to be gathering in big groups. They're going to be doing these kind of Zoom, virtual reality calls. We talked to them about washing their hands. And at the end of the book, we actually include a little mini diary that we wanted children, for parents to be able to print this page out to say, hey, how are you feeling today? Because although the book is titled We're Going to Be Okay, we know that many children have suffered great mental health strain, just like adults. They don't necessarily have the emotional maturity to be able to express it in ways that we can, but they can draw a picture. So we actually show at the bottom of the diary page the range of emotions on faces and say, draw out how you feel today. Are you angry? Are you sad? Write that out. And then on the next page, we have a page of things that I get to do, because we want to inspire that hope of, I may be feeling sad today, but maybe tomorrow I can wear my Halloween costume for the entire day. Or maybe tomorrow me and dad or me and mom can go for a walk. Something to give them that hope and motivation, because we do want to protect the innocence of a child for as long as we possibly can. Because right now I'm in the process of writing the third book for Ava. That is literally it's the antithesis of we're going to be okay. At this point, we've now created 40,000 new orphans. And I felt that there was a need to talk to those groups of children who've had the ultimate loss of a parent. And so Ava's next book is going to be Ava Says Goodbye. And it's going to talk about the process of grieving and the loss of a loved one. And how do you express that for children to know that they're not alone in that process? I'm going to try to use her to do that. And that's been a tough one to write. It's been tough. But yeah.
I can imagine. That is beautiful. We are all awaiting Ava's next adventure. Yeah. So I have one last question, and I'm so excited to ask you this question because you're let's find the optimism, right? So I myself am an expert joy hunter. So I want to ask you the same question I ask everyone who comes on this show. Where is your joy coming from right now?
Yeah, honestly and oddly enough, my joy comes from hearing the stories of people getting vaccinated, and that when I perform vaccinations on people, to hear them literally scream out, not because it hurts, because actually, I don't know if you've been vaccinated, the shot itself doesn't hurt. It's one of the least painful shots that I've received. But they scream out because they're so excited that they've made it. And you hear about what their goals are for them and their family. I get great inspiration. I live in a fantastic neighborhood with some brilliant little kids. And they they range from age of 3 to 16. But they come up with just so creative ways to stay engaged. Questions they ask, they're always super happy, despite the fact they've been locked inside their house for over a year and a half. A lot of inspiration from that. And just seeing people getting healthier in the ICU. I cover the ICU at work. And we've had some people after COVID having had lung transplants, and to see them after the lung transplant being able to breathe and walk out of this hospital, that's huge. And so I try to hold on to those. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Before we get out of here, I have to tell you that you and your mom were a source of joy for me over the last 24 hours. Now, it is very clear when you research Dr. Hilton that she not only comes from good stock, but she comes from good stock. You know what I'm saying? You were 8 years old when you told your mother you wanted to be a doctor, and her response was to start introducing you as Dr. Hilton.
Yes, fully.
I'm just saying, I'm a big believer in manifestation. I believe manifestation is real.
Yeah.
Dr. Hilton's the proof.
I mean, honestly, it was, when I say fully endorsed it, I honestly thought for a second, call me crazy, I was 8. But I honestly thought I was already a doctor, because she would sign my birthday cards to Dr. Hilton. She would introduce me to people. We were going to a restaurant, and they're like, oh yeah, you have, great kids. And she's like, yeah, this is, and this is Dr. Hilton. And I would be like, hi, nice to meet you. So here I am, a middle child of, single parent home, 3 kids, not a single, like I said, I saw more police officers. There was not a single teacher living in my neighborhood, much less a doctor. But I fully believed that that's what I was. And so I had zero plan B. And that's throughout, I can't even blame it on age, because I was 18, 19 in college, and I still had zero plan B of what if you don't get into med school. That wasn't an option. So yeah, so I owe everything to my mom, Mary Hilton. She's phenomenal. So yeah, she's
Shout
great.
out moms.
Yeah, yeah.
And for those of y'all parents, like, again, make sure you speaking that life over your kids and speaking that success into them from a young age. It works. Like I said, manifestation is real. Dr. Hilton is the proof. Your mother is a magician, and thank you for all of the magic that you bring into the world. Y'all, make sure you go order Dr. Hilton's Ava books, sign the petition on change.org, which was only about 25 signatures away from the initial 1,500 mark when I looked at it last night. And
Right.
go follow her on Twitter because her Twitter is lit.
Look, I go on some rants every now and then. Yes.
They're fantastic. They're fantastic. I don't even do Twitter. I'm going to get on Twitter just so I can follow you.
Look, you'll never have a boring moment.
Anything you'd like to say to the people before we get out of here?
Look, thank you for having me. This has been absolutely phenomenal. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us and for all the hard work that you do. Keep beaming. Keep beaming. We love to see it.
Perfect.
And with that, we are at the end of another episode of Masked Up. It's good to be back talking health with y'all, and it is always my honor. I'm Andrew Defy. Shout out to our sponsor at Protect Us, and as always, thanks to Netta, Suchita, Allison, and the rest of the Masked Up show crew. From all of us to all of you, like Mozzie said, health is wealth, and I need my bag. Covered faces don't get cases. Health doesn't come from a pharmacy, y'all. Till next time.